Hey everyone, and welcome to DarkCast Interviews. I'm your host, Jonathan Miley. DCI is traditionally a long-form interview podcast where we talk to game creators about new and upcoming video games, as well as who they are and what they do behind the scenes. This episode is a little bit different. I recently got some hands-on time with The Division 2, the sequel to the popular open-world RPG shooter from a couple of years ago. In addition, I was able to talk to several people behind the game, and that's what we're bringing you today. In the first segment, I talked to Julian Garrity, the creative director behind The Division 2, and in the second segment, I talked to Keith Evans, the senior lead designer. For more information about the game, check out the links in the show notes to this episode, including my written thoughts about the game, and several gameplay videos on YouTube. You can find all of that at darkstation.com, as well as the original DarkCast, and other video game reviews, previews, and features. You can subscribe to the show on iTunes, follow us on Twitter at darkstation_com, find us on Facebook, check us out on YouTube, and email us at podcast@darkstation.com. As always, thank you so much for listening. Now on with the show. Let's start off with Julian. Thanks for sitting down with me and talking about The Division 2.
Thank you for coming and playing.
Absolutely. If you could, I guess, start off by saying, who you are and what you do on the game.
So, my name is Julian Garrity, spelled Gerighthy. I'm the creative director on The Division 2.
Very cool, very cool. And you worked on The Division 1 as well?
Yes, sir.
Awesome.
I worked on Division 1, we shipped Division 1, and I did the entire post-launch for the Division 1 too.
Okay, awesome. So I'm going to waste a little bit of my 6 minutes because one of the things that I want to know is, besides The Division or The Division 2, what is your favorite Tom Clancy game?
I've worked on Tom Clancy games for so long. I think, I have two that pop into my mind. Blacklist. Okay. I worked on a bunch of Splinter Cells. I didn't work on Blacklist, and Blacklist is by far my favorite.
That is the appropriate answer, so congratulations.
Congratulations. Check. Sorry?
I don't know that would be a right answer.
Yeah, there is.
Most any Splinter Cell game would be the right answer.
It's a fantastic game. And Ghost Recon Wildlands is remarkably good. Mm-hmm. And the secret for it being magical is playing it in Tier 1. Have you played it in the hardest difficulty
No,
zone?
I have not.
You play it in Tier 1, and everybody stops fucking around, and it becomes purely tactical shooter, one shot, one kill, open world.
Excellent.
Simulation. It is phenomenal.
Okay,
so
I'll have to try that out.
It's a game mode I've spent 80 hours on because it's that good. It is remarkably good.
That is awesome.
They should have launched that as the base game.
That is, I previewed Wildlands a couple of years ago, and that was actually kind of my biggest complaint, was like, it just feels kind of a little too Just Cause Grand Theft Auto-y.
That goofy approach to it doesn't serve it any good at all. You play, and the magical thing about Tier 1 is that everybody takes it seriously. So you're not match made with people who don't want to play this right.
Gotcha.
So it becomes a phenomenal experience. I can't speak highly enough about it.
Okay, awesome. All right, well, we're not talking about Ghost Recon or
shame, because I got really excited there.
Or Blacklist. So what is the kind of initial setup for The Division 2 for somebody that doesn't know anything about the game?
I think it's 7 months after a pandemic has changed the face of the earth. And you're going into Washington, D.C., as a civilian who is there to make a change, a positive change, to pick the country and civilians up off the ground and to help rebuild the nation. That's, without knowing anything about the division, the technology, that's how I would pitch it. This is you as a civilian who wants to make a difference. Not a soldier, not an elite special agent, not a third echelon agent. This is a civilian with equipment who's going to take back the city.
Okay. So what is Third Echelon or Rainbow Six or The Ghost? What are they doing while all this is going down?
I have no idea. They don't pay me enough to think of those questions. It's a good one. I've never thought about it once.
So you worked on the Division 1.
Yeah.
You've worked on the Division 2. What is one of your favorite new additions to the new game?
I think this is the culmination of 3 years of live, of running the first game live. It's a culmination of everything that we wanted to do in the first game that didn't quite make it. If I were to pick two things, one narrative element and one gameplay element. The narrative element is the stakes are important. The stakes are super high. But what I'm really interested in is how are people living? How are people surviving? And how can we help people thrive and not just survive? So thinking of the, Maslow's pyramid, and thinking, okay, they have water, they have shelter, security, more or less. But how do we get to that point where people are starting to recreate art or re-enjoy life or see that there can be a better tomorrow despite the circumstances? So it's creating a world that isn't dystopian, that has hope. That's the narrative sort of thing. The gameplay thing, you're going to see the end game presentation, and some of it is definitely in that. But if we're talking about the basic structure of the game, I love what we've done with the open world, which creates a dynamic world around you that always offers challenges and really grounds it in the needs of the different factions. So you understand that a civilian patrol is going to want to go to the hospital to get medicine. It's absolutely grounded. But if you understand that the factions are going to want to get that stuff too, and that becomes a super strategic location, a control point. And those type of activities, I think, are great.
Very cool. Now, one of the kind of hallmarks of a lot of Ubisoft open world games is the interaction of multiple things in the environment. So can you come up on a fight between the factions?
You can come up in a fight with two enemy factions plus a civilian faction fighting it out and decide it's not my business, that's it, I'm going back to the base of operations. It's it creates that surprise that I think was missing from the first game, where when it did happen, it was magical, but it happened too infrequently.
Okay. Very cool. Now, in the presentation earlier today, you were talking about how the game simulates the other factions foraging and kind of scavenging, gathering resources. And then once they get strong enough, they'll actually try to do operations in the world, so they'll try to do kind of their own missions. Is that right?
It's kind of the system where there are locations that are super important for all of the factions.
Like the hospital.
Like a hospital or like an electronics company that has batteries and energy storage type of things. And those needs create movements, patrols for the different factions, and that can create emergent gameplay, of course.
Very cool. So for somebody that has sunk a lot of hours into the Division 1, they've played it, maybe they're still playing it, why should they jump from the Division 1 to the Division 2?
I think that what we wanted to do is propose a new setting, a new time frame, new mechanics. You played this morning. The shooting feels much snappier, more intuitive. It feels much more like a shooter.
Right. Less spongy.
Absolutely. No, but we can say that. I mean, for me, it was essential for us to tackle that problem because, yes, we're an RPG and we're always going to be an RPG, but we're a shooter, so we need to reduce that disconnection with reality because that makes a big disconnection. So, a combination of better enemy AI, lower time to kill for the enemy, but for you too, armor chipping off the heavies, visible impacts. All of this reduces that bullet sponginess, and it feels much snappier, more instinctive.
Yeah, that's one thing that I noticed fighting one of the heavies and seeing parts fly off. It just kind of clicks in your head that, okay, this is taking 12 clips of ammo to kill the guy, but I can actually see the damage instead of just a life bar twiddling down, which is very nice. So maybe somebody that hasn't, either they didn't play the Division 1 or they played it and it wasn't their thing, what's a reason for them to kind of be drawn into it this time?
I think the best reason for me is created a world with so many stories. And this is a world that is absolutely unique to the Division 2. I mean, you'll ask different members of the dev team, you'll get different answers. But for me, the world being something recognizable, realistic, recreated one-to-one, and then destroyed. You know? And then having this path of transformation where we're thinking of each building, each street, and trying to have a theme. What would happen if this block of buildings caught fire and there were no essential services to put it out? And you destroy that whole street and create an environmental story there. So when I think about entertainment, there are only a handful of movies maybe that have that sort of approach. Sure. So we have something that is grounded in reality, large scale, and doesn't really exist for other video games.
Sure. So the game is set in Washington, D.C. You said it's 7 months after the attack.
Yeah.
Why go for Washington, D.C. as a designer, not just, like what was the attraction?
Personal responses. Yeah. I think we researched New Orleans, we researched Seattle, we researched Chicago. The one city that had all the prerequisites for me, which was, is it Clancy-esque? Does it advance the story? Is it interesting? Does it have icons that are interesting for us to transform? And also, and super important to me, is it varied? Is the environment varied? Because New York, as iconic as it is, it's very grid and, steel and glass canyons. Washington is incredibly varied, and that creates super interesting gameplay opportunities. Wide open spaces, nature biomes with Roosevelt Island, Georgetown, smaller European-style houses, these massive buildings that scream power, all of this within the location or within the space that we could recreate.
Very cool. Any other things that you want people to know about the game?
I think, very obviously what you played today, I think is a super convincing argument. So I would say pre-order for guaranteed access to the beta coming out February 7th. Awesome. You can also register on www.thedivisiongame.com beta for a chance to be selected to play it too. Okay. And the game comes out March 15th.
Okay, well, thank you so much again for sitting down with me and talking about the game, and good luck as you guys finish things up and get it out the door, and then have you can't rest on your laurels. You'll have the long road of post-launch.
Why would you remind me? We were having such a good time. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. Keith, thanks so much for sitting down with me and talking about
Absolutely.
The Division 2. If we can just start things off, let everybody know who you are and what you do on the game.
Yeah, so Keith Evans, I'm the senior lead designer at Red Storm Entertainment, working on the Division 2.
Very cool. Very cool. So, senior lead designer.
Yes.
Okay.
It's a mouthful. It's a silly title.
So what does all that entail?
Basically, I lead the team of really talented designers at Red Storm. Specifically, we're focused on the Dark Zones, the 3 new Dark Zones, the new Conflict PvP mode, and we have our hands in a lot of the RPG and the balance of the game. Okay. Yeah.
And you were one of the main studios that worked on the Division 1 as well.
Yeah, it's, all the studios who did the first one are kind of back for the sequel. It's a lot, like a huge portion of the exact same team, which is kind of like rarer than you would think, and honestly kind of a nice gift because we're able to really push the game forward, continue the work we started a long time ago, which is great.
So I got to ask Julian this earlier, and I'm going to go ahead and ask you, besides the Division 1 or 2,
yes,
what is your favorite Tom Clancy game?
Oh my God.
Just to derail the conversation immediately.
Splinter Cell Pandora Tomorrow.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay.
Did it.
Both of you said a Splinter Cell game.
That was so hard.
That makes me very happy. The Jakarta mission where you get to capture the guy that says Pandora Tomorrow. I can't remember his name. That was an amazing thing.
Oh my God. Those whole first, all the games are good, but those first 3 games on the Xbox were amazing.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so getting back into the Division, what's one of the main things that you guys learned over the course, not just, the original development, but the 3 years that you've been supporting it since then? What's kind of one of the main lessons that you learned from that you're taking into the Division 2?
Yeah, I mean, you make the first game, and you put a lot into it, and, we were feeling pretty good about it, and you release it, and I think everyone was really, really happy with that 1 through 30 campaign, but then they hit endgame, and at launch, there honestly wasn't an endgame, right? You could go back and replay missions, you could continue clearing the open world, but there wasn't any clear goals for you, there wasn't anything for you to strive for, and I think that's the main thing that we're kind of pushing forward in the sequel, and it's been in our heads the entire time, is let's ship with not only a great campaign, but a substantial endgame at launch where every night I jump on, I can have a different gameplay experience because I can play missions, I can go do open world, I can play Dark Zone, I can play organized PvP, I can clear my invaded missions for the week, or very soon after launch, I have geared up enough to play the 8-player raid. So it's about having that full package at launch that really outlines what the game is once the story ends.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So was there anything besides, obviously, we're talking about in-game, that's what I just got to play.
Yeah.
But is there anything else kind of from ground level that you knew had to be in the Division 2 versus
I think we had some other big design goals. I think the first game was I think even more of an RPG than players thought it was going to be at launch, right? And a lot of depth came into the gear game very quickly after launch, and a lot of power was given to the players, and that resulted in that criticism that we got a lot, which I think is very fair, which is that there was a sense of bullet sponge to the combat, right? You'd have a machine gun and you're shooting someone with a hoodie on and it's 60 rounds, and there's a disconnect there. So this time we've had a clear goal from the beginning to keep the combat much more kind of impactful, keep those red bar enemies stay persistent through the game. We don't just phase them out with always harder enemies, because it's not just about the DPS check. They are lethal towards you. Your combat skills matter a lot more, so headshots should down an enemy with a sniper rifle, right? And we want that to be something that we don't lose as the player gets more power. So we've had to invest a lot into the AI to give them reasons to occasionally still require more than one shot. So you'll see guys with heavy armor. We brought in drones with the Black Tusk, or the big dog, which really...
those are evil.
They're evil. They're absolutely evil. But, they're there to still push that RPG part of the game, still push the player to want to get more and more powerful gear, but also we never lose that core, fun, cover shooter gameplay.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So, you mentioned Black Tusk. That's kind of the new faction that invades at the end game. How does that work? Are all of the missions now invaded by the Black Tusk, or what's happening with it?
Yeah, so the way it kind of works is you finish the campaign. We're not going to go into all the story little details, but needless to say, the Black Tusk arrive, and they start this invasion into DC. So the way this works is, in post-launch, in the first game, we added world tiers, and that's kind of was these tiers of gear and difficult AI that you could out-level and then move into the next world tier. So now we still have the world tier system, but you progress through world tiers by gearing up and then clearing the invasion for that world tier. So they feel like these little mini campaigns of, like, the Black Tusk move in, they invade 4 or 5 missions, they invade a stronghold. You have a very clear goal of what you need to do to progress, and then and then it's all about basically achieving the gear you need and the power you need, clearing out the invasion and progressing on. And at the end of that whole journey, then you have the 8-player raid. So yeah.
And can you talk about the 8-player raid? Like what are you doing in that?
Yeah, so we're not going into all the details on it, but I'll say that in the first game we had incursions, which were kind of our most difficult content that had custom bosses and very bespoke missions, but at their core they were just really hard missions, right? We knew we didn't want to do that again. We wanted to separate this PvE content from the invaded missions, which can get even harder than what you're playing today. You can play them on more challenging difficulties. So that's where we brought in the need for 8 players, because it's going to be a lot more about team coordination, and it's a true raid with raid mechanics and custom bosses, and something that players are going to really have to dive into.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So if somebody's played the Division 1, they got really invested in it, what is the draw to go into the Division 2 if they're still having a great time with the Division 1?
Yeah, I think the draw is all the new experiences you're going to offer up to players, we're going to offer up to players, and the fact that you're not losing anything, right? We've taken all the lessons from the first game, all those features that I think players now expect. We don't want to have a version 2, a sequel where you have to backslide at all. So everything should be what players expect and more. And so I think like the different environments that players are going to be able to explore really feels drastically different and offer different combat opportunities. And for the players who still want to play the Division, we've been running a series of challenges, shields that players can kind of this set of really hard challenges that give you rewards waiting for you inside the Division 2. So we're trying to really reward those hardcore players for sticking with us.
Awesome. So on the reverse side, if somebody didn't really care for the Division 1, what's something that you feel like would be a good draw for them to at least give it a shot?
Yeah, I think there's a few things there. I think in the first game, we had the Dark Zone at launch, right? And it was this kind of very, very unusual, almost social experiment version of player versus environment versus player, where that was the PvP experience. This time we still have that, but we brought in this layer of fairness to the world, so that there's a layer of normalization, so your player skill matters a lot more. And at launch we have a whole organized PvP suite. So I think those shooter players are going to have something that they can really sink their teeth into. And then, like I said, like that feeling of shooter gameplay, I think it's especially apparent in that assault on the White House as you're trying to clear that open field. Mm-hmm. I think the shooter gameplay is elevated to a whole different level. I think it's, I think we're in a really good spot to offer both RPG fans, but even more cater to shooter fans than the first game did.
Awesome.
Yep.
And as far as kind of the game going forward once it's out, you guys talked about it in the briefing that over the first year you're not going to be splitting the player base.
Yeah, absolutely.
With content. Can you talk a little bit more about kind of what's coming down the road and how that's going to work?
Yeah, so there's still a lot of little details we'll be seeing as we get closer to launch, but the basic idea is that there's 3 basic major episodes, that are going to introduce new name zones and new narrative missions, and that's something that we didn't do with the first game. We never added more main missions that really expanded the story, and we really want to deliver that this time for those players who are just into it for the lore. And then outside of that, we're going to be adding multiple raids. We're going to be adding additional modes and maps to conflict. Lots of other things as well. So I think the offering that we're going to have this time for free is going to be equal to what we charged last time for in the season pass. It's going to be really substantial.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And with any game that's online, it's just kind of a modern, either good or evil, depending on what your take is. But most games have microtransactions.
Sure.
How is that handled in the game?
So we're still ironing out like the specific details of everything. We'll outline it all before launch, but what I will say is that we're very much following the model of the first game, which is we're not selling things that give the player power. Obviously, there will be some microtransactions for sure, right? But we're looking at something that doesn't create imbalance between players and is fair for everybody.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I guess to kind of wrap things up, what is your favorite new addition, whether narrative, gameplay, whatever the case may be, to the Division 2?
Well, that's a really hard question because there's like a lot of stuff that's been added. But I think if I had to pinpoint one thing, it's actually the living world simulation. I think it's like the thing that separates this game 100% from the offering last time, because last time the world was so beautiful, but after a while I didn't have a reason to explore it. I fast traveled a lot. Now I think having the simulation running, having the settlements still matter even in endgame, having variable factions in zones every time I log in based on what is happening in the world, it's going to make the game so much more replayable, and it's going to keep offering you new gameplay, for I think the long haul.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, well, if you could just kind of let people know when and where they can get their hands on the game for the private beta and when it's going to be out for public release.
Absolutely. So the game will actually launch on March 15th on PS4, Xbox One, and PC, and the private beta is going to launch on February 7th, and I can't wait for everyone to jump in and check it out.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again for sitting down with me, and good luck as you guys finish up the game.
Yeah,
and
thank
then
you so much.
Support it for the next, 3 years or so.
We're just starting. We're just starting, right? It's awesome.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, man.
Thank you very much.
Well, that does it for this episode of DCI. Thank you so much for listening. If you want to find out more information about the game, check out the links in the show notes to this episode, including my written thoughts about the game, as well as several gameplay videos on YouTube. You can find all of that on darkstation.com, as well as the original DarkCast and other video game reviews, previews, and features. You can subscribe to the show on iTunes, follow us on Twitter at darkstation_com, find us on Facebook, check us out on YouTube, and email us at podcast@darkstation.com. Again, thank you so much for listening, and until next time, have a good one.